I know precisely when a heart stops trusting a beat it once relied on. 3 weeks ago, my daughter told me I would not be welcome at her son's christening. 2 days after that, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, and a stranger's voice told me my name was on a warrant. I'm Harold Whitfield, 68 years old, and for 6 years I quietly covered the $3,800 monthly lease on the downtown dental practice. My daughter Vanessa built her career inside. I did it from a rented room above a hardware store, because a man doesn't need much when he's decided someone else's future matters more than his own comfort. But that afternoon in April, standing outside the glass doors of the church nursery while a security guard checked a list that didn't have my name on it, I understood something I'd spent 6 years refusing to see. I wasn't her father anymore. I was a line item. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments which state you're listening from tonight. And if you've ever given everything to someone who gave you a locked door in return, hit that subscribe button, because you are exactly who this channel was built for. I spent 38 years as a claims adjuster for a regional insurance company, examining wreckage for a living. Car accidents, house fires, flood damage. My entire career was built on one skill: looking at the aftermath of a disaster and working backward to find the exact moment things went wrong. Every collapse has an origin point: a frayed wire, a structural crack painted over instead of repaired. People think catastrophes happen suddenly, but they don't. They happen slowly, then all at once. And if you know where to look, you can always find the first small failure that started the chain reaction. I know how to read a disaster. I just never thought I'd have to read my own. When my wife Carol died of a stroke 5 years ago, the house we'd shared for 31 years turned into something I couldn't walk through anymore without hearing her voice in every room. Vanessa had just finished her dental residency and was drowning in student loans, renting a cramped shared office 2 towns over, splitting hygienist hours with 3 other new dentists just to keep the lights on. She wanted her own practice, not a modest one. A gleaming clinic in the medical district downtown, glass walls, a receptionist, an actual parking lot. She didn't have the credit history. She didn't have collateral. She had ambition and a folder of business projections she'd printed out and left on my kitchen table without a word. The way people leave things they're too proud to ask for directly. I sold the house. I sold 31 years of memories in 14 days because staying in it was its own kind of grief. And I told myself I was simply redirecting the money towards something living instead of something gone. I signed a personal guarantee on the commercial lease so Vanessa's new practice could open its doors, and I told her I'd cover the $3,800 monthly payment out of my pension and Carol's life insurance until her patient base grew large enough to carry it herself. A bridge loan, I called it, temporary. I moved into a single room above Delacroix Hardware, where the smell of fresh-cut lumber drifted up through the floorboards every morning, and my only furniture was a bed, a recliner, and a card table where I ate my meals alone. For the first year, Vanessa called every Sunday. She'd talk about a difficult extraction or a nervous child patient, and I'd feel useful, necessary, like the money flowing out of my account every month was still connected to a person who loved me. Then the calls started changing shape. They got shorter, more clipped. Transactional in a way I told myself was just her being busy building a practice. Then came her husband, Marcus. Marcus DeLuca sold commercial real estate, and he had the kind of smile that made you check your wallet was still in your pocket after shaking his hand. He moved into Vanessa's life 18 months after Carol died, and within a year he'd convinced her they needed to expand the practice, a second treatment room, a rebrand, a website redesign, all of it billed to me in phone calls that had stopped pretending to be conversations. Dad, we need another $1,200 for the new equipment financing. Can you handle that? Dad, Marcus says the branding consultant wants half up front. It's only $2,000. Dad, we're behind on the lease again. You're covering it, right? There was no inquiry about my knees, which had started giving out on the stairs to my room above the hardware store. There was no invitation to dinner that wasn't preceded by an invoice disguised as small talk. I paid every single one. Not because I was foolish, but because I was running an experiment I didn't want to admit I was running, watching how much weight a relationship could bear before something underneath it finally gave out. Marcus made it clear, in the careful, glancing way cowards make things clear, that my presence embarrassed him. When I visited the practice, he'd introduced me to colleagues as Vanessa's father, he's retired, in a tone that made retired sound like a diagnosis. Vanessa had picked up his habits like a contagious thing. She started correcting the way I dressed. She started wincing when I called the practice a little clinic in front of her office manager. She started treating my visits like scheduled inspections rather than something she looked forward to. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting. It arrived quietly on a gray Saturday afternoon in April, 3 weeks before her son Caleb's christening, my first grandchild, 7 months old, a baby I had held exactly twice. I'd spent 2 months of evenings in my small room building him a rocking horse from cedar, sanding every curve by hand, because my fingers remembered wood better than they remembered how to hold a phone conversation that wasn't about money. I wrapped it in blue paper. I drove 40 minutes to the church that Saturday for the christening rehearsal, wanting to see Caleb, wanting 1 hour that had nothing to do with invoices. Vanessa met me in the parking lot before I'd even gotten the rocking horse out of my truck bed. She stood with her arms crossed against the cold, and she told me, without quite meeting my eyes, that Marcus's parents were going to be the primary grandparents in the ceremony, that having too many family members up front would look cluttered in the photos, that maybe it would be simpler if I just came to the reception afterward instead. Simpler for who? I wanted to ask. I didn't. I just nodded, put the rocking horse back in my truck, and drove home in silence so complete I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I didn't call her that night. I didn't call her the next morning either. 2 days later, I got the call from a number I didn't recognize, and a woman identified herself as an investigator with the State Insurance Fraud Division. She asked if I was aware that a disability claim had been filed in my name against my former employer, alleging a workplace injury 11 months after my retirement, for a sum of $84,000 paid out through a settlement to an account that was not mine, but had been opened using my Social Security number. I sat down at my card table very slowly. 38 years reading the wreckage of other people's disasters, and I hadn't seen the crack forming directly under my own feet. It took 11 days of phone calls, notarized statements, and finally a face-to-face meeting with the investigator, a sharp, tired woman named Denise Okafor, to understand what had actually happened. Marcus had gotten access to my personal documents 18 months earlier, during a weekend he'd spent helping me organize my files after Carol's death, back when I still thought his attentiveness was kindness rather than reconnaissance. He'd photographed my Social Security card. He'd forged a workplace injury claim using my former employer's letterhead, which he'd apparently lifted from an old file box in my closet. He'd redirected the settlement into a shell account and used it, along with the lease guarantees I was already paying, to fund the equipment financing, the branding consultant, and Denise found this in banking records within a week. 3 separate cash withdrawals totaling $22,000 that had gone toward a down payment on a lake house. Neither Vanessa nor I had ever been told about. Vanessa's name wasn't on the fraudulent claim, but her signature was on 2 of the equipment financing documents that used the stolen settlement as collateral, and when Denise asked her directly whether she'd known where the money for the second treatment room had actually come from, Vanessa's answer, recorded and later played back to me in a small gray office with fluorescent lighting, was this: I didn't ask. I just needed it to be true. I hung up the phone that night and sat in my recliner until the sun came up. Not from grief, from clarity. 38 years of reading disasters had taught me that once you find the first crack, you don't patch it. You trace it all the way to the foundation, and you decide, calmly, without shouting, exactly how much of the structure is worth saving. I called Denise back the next morning and told her I wanted to press charges. I called my attorney, a quiet, precise man named Foster Reyes, who'd handled my estate paperwork since Carol died, and told him I wanted the commercial lease guarantee terminated immediately, effective the first of the month. I told him I wanted every dollar I'd sent Vanessa and Marcus in the last 18 months documented, time-stamped, and prepared for restitution proceedings. Foster asked me if I was certain. I told him I had spent my entire career reading the aftermath of things people refused to see coming. I wasn't going to spend what was left of my life pretending I hadn't seen this one. The lease default notice went out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Marcus was calling my phone 11 times in a row, then Vanessa, then a block number I didn't answer. Friday evening, headlights swept across the window of my room above the hardware store, and I heard 2 car doors slam in the gravel lot below. I'd installed a security camera at the top of the stairs 2 weeks earlier. The same week Denise had warned me that fraud cases sometimes turn desperate before they turn quiet. Foster had told me calmly to let anything happen on camera, and to never, under any circumstances, meet either of them alone anywhere. The conversation wouldn't be recorded. Marcus came up the stairs first, and Vanessa followed 2 steps behind him, her face pale in a way I hadn't seen since Carol's funeral. Marcus didn't bother with hello. He said the lease default was going to destroy Vanessa's practice, destroy her reputation, destroy everything she'd built, and that I owed it to my own daughter to fix what I'd broken. I told him, quietly, that I hadn't broken anything. I'd simply stopped paying for a life he'd built out of stolen insurance money and my own dead wife's life policy. His face changed the way weather changes right before a storm actually breaks. He crossed the small room in 2 steps and grabbed the collar of my shirt with both hands, pushing me back against the card table hard enough that it screeched against the floor. He told me, inches from my face, that I was going to call the insurance investigator myself and tell her the whole thing was a misunderstanding, or he would make sure I regretted it for whatever years I had left. Vanessa didn't move. She stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, and for one terrible second, I watched my daughter decide not to stop this. The knock at the door came 30 seconds later. 2 police officers. Responding to the recorded distress signal, Foster's monitoring service had triggered automatically. The moment raised voices crossed a certain decibel threshold on the camera feed. A system Foster had quietly installed, the same, weak as the camera, without telling me exactly what it did until I needed it. The lead officer ordered Marcus to release me and step back, and Marcus's grip loosened so fast I nearly lost my footing. Marcus tried the tone first, the corporate smoothness sliding back over his face like a mask clicking into place. He told the officers this was a private family disagreement, that I was an elderly man who sometimes got confused, that he was simply trying to calm me down. The second officer, a woman with a notepad already out, told him they'd heard the threat of physical harm clearly through the open line before they'd even reached the stairs, and that they'd be filing a report for assault and attempted extortion. Vanessa finally spoke. She said my name, once, the way she used to say it when she was small and had woken from a nightmare. I looked at her, and for the first time in 6 years, I felt something close but not identical to sadness. Mostly, I felt the particular stillness that comes after you've finally located the exact point where a structure failed, and there's nothing left to do but stand back and watch the rest of it settle. I told the officers I wanted Marcus removed from the property and that formal charges were already in motion through the State Fraud Division, and that my attorney would be in contact regarding a restraining order by morning. The officer nodded, took Marcus by the arm, and walked him down the stairs past the hardware store's darkened windows. Vanessa lingered a moment longer and asked, in a small voice, what was going to happen to Caleb. That question stayed with me longer than anything else that night, because it was the first time in 18 months she'd asked me something that wasn't about money, and it came only after everything had already collapsed. I told her the truth. I told her that Caleb was innocent in all of this, and innocent people don't lose their grandfather over what the adults around them chose to do. I told her that Foster would be setting up a modest trust in Caleb's name, funded not by another cent flowing through Vanessa or Marcus, but held independently until he was 18, and that I intended to be present in his life on my own terms, through supervised, scheduled visits arranged directly through the court, if that was what it took. I told her that loving her son didn't require me to keep funding the version of her life that had led to this stairwell. Vanessa didn't answer. She just nodded and walked down the stairs alone into a night that had already decided what it was going to take from her. Marcus was arrested within the week on the extortion charge, and the fraud investigation that followed took another 4 months to fully unravel. The state ultimately charged him with identity theft and insurance fraud in the amount of $84,000, and he was sentenced to 7 years. Vanessa, whose signature on the financing documents made her a knowing participant, even if she hadn't orchestrated the theft herself, pleaded to a lesser charge of financial fraud and received 18 months, along with the loss of her dental license pending a lengthy reinstatement review that could take years, if it happened at all. The practice closed within 60 days. The lake house was seized and liquidated as part of the restitution order, and every dollar recovered went first toward repaying the stolen settlement, then toward a trust account with Caleb's name on it, managed by Foster, untouched by anyone who had proven they couldn't be trusted with it. I moved out of the room above the hardware store 4 months later, not because I couldn't afford to stay, but because I finally could afford not to. I found a small house on the edge of town, nothing grand, just 2 bedrooms and a porch that caught the morning sun. I finished the rocking horse I'd started for Caleb and gave it to him properly, in a supervised visit arranged through family court, in a room that smelled like disinfectant and old carpet, and he grabbed one of the wooden handles with both fists and laughed the way babies laugh at things they don't understand yet but trust anyway. That laugh is the first uncomplicated thing anyone in my family has given me in 6 years. I see him twice a month now. It isn't what I imagined grandfatherhood would look like, sitting in a supervised visitation room with a caseworker taking notes in the corner, but it's honest. And honest was never something Marcus or, toward the end, Vanessa seemed to value very highly. People like to say that blood is thicker than water, as though shared genetics were some kind of binding contract that guarantees loyalty regardless of what a person actually does with the years they're given. 38 years of reading wreckage taught me otherwise. A structure doesn't hold because of what it's made of. It holds because of how it was built and how carefully it was maintained, and whether the people responsible for it told the truth about the cracks when they first appeared instead of painting over them and hoping no one would look too closely. I don't regret the 6 years I spent paying for a life I was never really part of. I regret the 6 years I spent refusing to read the signs I was trained, professionally, over decades, to recognize instantly in anyone else's life but my own. I built a career on knowing exactly when a structure was too compromised to save, and it took my own daughter standing in a doorway, silent, while her husband's hands were on my collar, for me to finally apply that same clarity to myself. I still send Caleb something small every month, nothing extravagant, deposited quietly into the trust that Marcus and Vanessa will never be able to touch. Not out of guilt, out of the plain, uncomplicated love that has nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with choice. That's the only kind of family I have any interest in funding anymore, the kind that's never once sent me an invoice disguised as a phone call. If there's a lesson worth carrying out of a story like this, it's this. Generosity that goes unquestioned for long enough eventually gets mistaken for weakness by the people receiving it, and the moment you finally set it down, don't apologize for the silence that follows. Some bridges are worth reinforcing. Others were compromised long before you ever agreed to carry their weight, and the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for whoever's left standing on solid ground is to finally let them fall.